Hello, everyone. I'm Hadeel Kabosh. I'm a consultant at Cosmic Centaurs. For those of you joining us for the first time, Cosmic Centaurs is an organizational and leadership development consultancy. We work with holistic leaders to help them build organizations that thrive and deliver. Thank you for joining us in this year's edition of the Cosmic Conference. This event is part of our 6-week long conference, The System is the Strategy, all about systems thinking and shifting from firefighting to future building. We've been running the Cosmic Conference for 6 years now, actually, because one of our principles is to share what we learn with the world. Every year, we choose a theme that resonates with the leaders we work with, from navigating remote work and managing hybrid teams, to designing effective employee experiences, to strategy execution and mastering leadership values. Over the past year, we've heard countless leaders share the same frustration, feeling trapped in firefighting mode. They tackle urgent problems with energy and determination, only to watch the same issues resurface again and again. What these stories reveal is not a failure of leadership, but of the systems we rely on. That's why this year's theme is about how the most effective leaders shift from firefighting to future building and really becoming the architects of the future. So, what does it really mean to think in systems? Why does it matter for leaders today? And how do we move from abstract concepts to practical methods we can use in our organizations? We're answering these questions by helping leaders build the mindset, the methodology, and the muscle of systems thinking. This year, we've created a very wide range of programs to make system thinking tangible. In our online sessions, you'll find 3 tracks. The first one is System Thinking 101. It's about getting the foundations, the core principles, tools, and methods of system thinking. And we actually wrapped up this track yesterday. You'll notice that all of these sessions begin with understanding, ... And you can find them in all of our social media channels and on our website. The second track, like today's session, is all about learning from leaders who build systems to scale, innovate, build site safety, measure impact, or even reclaim balance. These are tangible lessons you can take back to your own context. And the third track is about the human and spiritual side of systems thinking, which we're actually kicking off tomorrow. And this is really about bringing heart back into the conversation and centering the human and the people that are behind these systems. We have so many great webinars lined up, but I'm most excited about starting this conversation right here. This topic is close to my heart because I really value depth and understanding, the full picture of things, and measuring real change helps us see what's working, what's not, and make more informed decisions. But I also know that numbers don't tell us the whole story, especially when it comes to measuring change that's human and complicated and interconnected. Actually, when we were preparing for this conference, we noticed that a lot of system thinkers come from the world of development and social impact. Because in that world, you have to engage with systems that go beyond your organization. So you're working with governments, you're working with communities, with cross-sector partners, and you're navigating all these different agendas and time horizons, which makes it an incredibly rich space to study systems change. And that's why I'm so looking forward to hearing from both Daniel and Mazuba today and learning alongside them about how we can take that wisdom and apply it to any kind of organization, whether it's private or nonprofit. So together today, we'll be unpacking how leaders can design strategies that are built for impact and how they can learn to tell the full story of that impact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our 2 remarkable guests joining us today. Joining us is Daniel Delati. Daniel is a strategy and management advisor with 23 years experience across the private, public, and nonprofit sectors in the US and the Levant. He helps public entities, nonprofit organizations, and scaling SMEs align strategy with capacity, surface their unique value, and scale initiatives. He is the managing partner at 360 Consulting, a boutique firm that helps nonprofit and public actors enhance their impact, sustainability, and growth. I also want to welcome Mazuba Haanyama, an independent consultant who has over 15 years of experience in working towards building bridges across tech, governments, corporations, and civil society. She works towards creating innovative strategies that ensure positive social impact. She has a keen ability and interest in influencing public policy, navigating complex regulatory landscapes to benefit vulnerable communities. Through effective partnership building, she implements advocacy programs that create meaningful change, aligning with organizational objectives while also promoting societal good. Mazuba and Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Before we dive in, I just want to give the audience a quick idea of how we're running this session. So this is a moderated discussion between me, Mazuba, and Daniel, and we're going to try our best to make this conversation as engaging as possible. So I invite everyone tuning in today to write their thoughts, their questions, and drop them in the chat, and we'll make our best to get to these towards the end of the conversation. And with that, let's start with a bit of a backstory. Behind every system is a purpose. So I'd love to hear from both of you, what systemic problems first called you into this line of work, and how has it shaped you think about impact?
Daniel, you go ahead.
Thanks, Mazuba. Yeah, it's interesting you asked that, Hadeel, because I was thinking about that at the beginning while you were introducing this session. And I thought exactly of that, how I got into this career. And I remembered I got into this career because I spent 8 years in the private sector. And I always thought my career was just too siloed. It didn't really reflect like the larger scheme of things and what was happening in the world. And I don't mean in terms of impact. I mean in terms of understanding. And my mind is a restless mind. So I always think about complex things and the problems that we're dealt with. So years ago, I moved back to Lebanon, and that's where I entered into the development scene. And then later on, the Syrian crisis happened, and that kind of captivated me, and I continued doing this type of work. And I'll tell you, I like what you said about this type of work. This line of work does force you to think completely differently than you were if you were in a specific sector elsewhere.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think when you said, what got me into this type of work, I'm not sure if I am in this type of work or if I have been forced to be. Only because I think a lot of the work I've done has been, you're kind of answering to whether it's shareholders, founder, and we used to call it monitoring and evaluation. I think that now calling it impact is much better. But to some degree, you sort of have to quantify, qualify what you're doing and how you've been doing it. And I think a lot of my experience, or I've sort of centered thinking about inequality as a systemic problem, and how the work that I've been involved in tries to address and not answer, but at least mitigate the consequences of inequalities. And I think central to that is around like power and how power works. And those are things that are super, super interesting to me.
I know you have a lot to say about power dynamics, Mazuba. We'll get to that just in a bit. Thank you both for that. I really appreciate that perspective. And what resonated with me that you both are keen about solving bigger problems. You don't want to be stuck in one organization and its issues, but you really want to shift change in the bigger ecosystem, and look at the world and all of the systemic breakdowns that are in it. Thank you for that, Mazuba and Daniel. Daniel, for this next chapter, you had a very memorable way of framing it, impact by design. And I want us to unpack that a bit. A strategy, of course, isn't static. It has to evolve with shifting markets and the ecosystems. how do you design impact strategies that stay adaptable, yet they're still anchored in a sense of purpose?
Sure. I think, if you talk about an organizational strategy or a program policy strategy, or even your own personal strategy of how you want to live your life and what you want to do, they have a lot in common, which is really have to be very clear about what your mission is. And that it can sound very cliche, define your mission and vision, but that's not what I mean. I mean, define your North Star and what you're going to do to get there. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations, and even a lot of policies don't really define the North Star. It's very vague. Even though a lot of people sitting around the room will agree on it, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room facilitating a discussion, or I'm part of a discussion where people are resistant to clarifying it further. So clarity is key, and clarity on your North Star, so your mission, clarity on who you are, your identity. So what are your values? What do you stand for in life? And what are your red lines? And then third and foremost, and most importantly, what's your value proposition? So that's business language. But really what that means is, what are you going to do about this problem that you care about? And how will you do it? That's it.
Yeah, I actually love that sense of clarity, defining the mission. And also you spoke a bit about like branding elements, and that speaks to me because my background is in marketing. So what is your identity? Who's your target audience? They're both strategy and marketing concepts. And this might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but not controversial, but maybe unpopular. But I think the word impact is often overused. Like I think everyone claims to do impact and they throw it very easily here and there. But I think like putting that, having that clear North Star, having that clear, even key messages in the way that you articulate what you do and how you do it, really helps shift that more generic, like, we're making impact. So what is it that you're making? It allows organizations or initiatives or whatever it is to really have a focus. Mazuba,
Definitely,
maybe
I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mazuba.
Go ahead.
Please respond to what Hadeel said. I'll come in just now.
Yeah, so I think just in terms of being in line with to be able to be aligned with your North Star, your mission, and then your values, your identity, but then also what value you bring to the world. You have to really understand what's needed, right? You have to understand people, and you have to understand communities. So in the business world, it's understand the consumer and what they want. What problem are you trying to solve? But for everything else in the world, it's the same thing. And I think we are very fast to jump to conclusions of what the problem is and what the solution is. And given that we have a global system that rewards us for quick projects and very quick activities, the word impact, as you describe it, is overused and has become very generic, has become that in that sense. And so impact is a very, very big word. So let's say, one of the biggest crises in the world right now, if we're talking about Gaza, and you do any type of activity there, how do you measure impact? How would you measure impact? You probably can't. It's probably near impossible. But is there not impact in any action you would take? There is it. There is. So then what do you revert back to? Again, clarity on the problem, clarity on the need, what your North Star is, and how you're addressing it.
For sure. Mazuba, did you want to add something?
I didn't, but as Daniel was talking, I was thinking, I wonder if we would be so interested in measuring impact if we weren't asked to do so. Right? Like the idea that impact can be measured is perhaps faulty in and of itself, right? And sometimes it's necessary for a business to function. But is it necessary, like I don't know, in my own life, if I think about what you said, Daniel, do I have a North Star for my life? I don't know. But do I measure my own impact? Like, I'm sure there's like a business book about like, being productive and getting ahead in life that probably says I should. But that wouldn't be an exciting proposition for me. And so I wonder if the very nature of measuring or thinking that we can is like problematic in and of itself.
I've never thought about it that way. That's a very interesting perspective. Daniel, I see you smiling and reacting.
No, and so I mean, in my own business, what we do is impact evaluations. But I mean, a lot of those are externally requested. The client doesn't always request them. So yes, I agree with Mazuba. I mean, it is a system that has been created that measures quick impact, right? So people talk about 2 or 3 programs or interventions or policies as long-term, and that's not long-term. And impact.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
What made me think about it was because exactly like we will see the impact of interventions for years to come, as what is happening now is the result and the impact of interventions years before, right? So I think that part of the challenge with measuring impact, without going too far down that, is like time. Like some things just haven't yet matured enough, that you need to wait and see. If I think about the impact of my parents' decisions to like move from where I was born, I'm probably feeling the impact of that more so now as an adult than I ever did as a kid. And so perhaps sometimes we are too limited in the timeline when we're thinking about impact. Yeah.
Actually, that's a great way of putting it, because we often see that in assistive thinking, like when you design a system or intervention, you don't wait long enough to see the actual impact. And I think that's where impact measurement frameworks come in, and they allow us to actually look at what you call these different time horizons and these different, like looking, okay, there is a short-term impact or outcome that you're trying to make, but there's also one that's very much further down the line that you also need to account for. So I think the theory of change is a great tool for that, actually. I have a follow-up question here, Daniel. In your work with organizations, how have you observed or helped leaders sense shifts in the broader ecosystem and adapt their strategies to emerging realities? So these things that are coming 3, 4, 5 years down the line, how can organizations, be aware of them from now, or at least sense them and design strategies in a way that are adaptable?
Sure. I think I really appreciated a lot of the leaders I've been able to work with, in the sense that there's really 2 types of leaders when it comes to this topic. So are they following context changes and what's happening in the world? There's leaders who are internally focused, and there's others who are more externally focused. And I've had both as well as managers who've managed me in my career. And I think the people I was always attracted to are people who are externally focused. Not because, if they didn't do a good job at planning our team retreat, I would be pissed about it. But no, I preferred always a manager and a leader who has their ear down to the ground and who's meeting enough people all the way at the top level to going to the field and meeting a lot of different people. So I think what I always tell people is that how much time are you spending outside of the office? And if it's anything less than 30%, you're failing at your job. And I've done that mistake over and over. And I've become so internally focused, firefighting, making sure the team is happy, and making sure we're getting our goals, implementing our projects, getting our assignments in, client is happy, that I forget about the outside. And the outside is not only, as you mentioned, Hadeel, marketing, from a marketing perspective, important. As a business, more importantly, organizations to remain relevant have to be close to the not just the final beneficiary, but to everyone, to their stakeholders and the people on the ground.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think like we often get used to like just being stuck in that one bubble and not looking outside. And I think that's a very core part of system thinking is that like, what is your map? Your map is not just your organization, but it's also this wider ecosystem. And what are the different players that you need to be constantly engaging? And as you say, speaking to, whether it's someone on the ground or someone at the top or someone outside your organization altogether, and just literally be in these conversations, and just hear a different perspective of what's happening or what is about to happen in the world. Thank you for that, Dio. I actually love the example of Kodak and Fujifilm here. It's a great case study. And Kodak was one of these organizations that ignored what was happening. So there's this digital disruption coming at them, and they were like, cool, we'll continue doing what we're doing. People always go back. I remember there was a quote, I don't know the exact quote from the leader at the time, but it said something like, when there's a fire, the first thing that people will grab are their physical photographs. And that really just led them to ignore this digital disruption that was happening. But on the other hand, Fujifilm actually, they know this was threatening their core business. And what they did is that they leveraged their deep expertise in collagen chemistry to invest in an entirely new business line, which was cosmetics and skincare. Not a lot of people know this. And then this later actually accounted for more than a third of their revenue. And they later even invested in LCD screens because they realized that all of these had the same tech and material, which they were already used to, and had expertise on. And yeah, like they really were able to look at, okay, we're investing in something, we're experimenting with it, and this might be our new reality. And it was true. We actually have a podcast episode on this story, unpacking all the details and the leader behind it. I'll be happy to share with both of you after this session. And I'm sure the team will be dropping it in the comments as we speak for everyone else.
That would be great.
My next question is for both of you. Many organizations operate in ecosystems with competing priorities. For example, you have a company that might want to move fast while a government partner that is prioritizing compliance or community trust. So how do you get stakeholders to look at the bigger picture and align them on moving the system in one direction, regardless of their individual agendas or priorities?
So when I first saw this question, I thought I had a very eloquent answer. As you're asking it now, I'm like, it's a great question. So I think that's always the case, right? Competing priorities is kind of feels often, more than not, we have different things that we're prioritizing when we work together. And so, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's not so sophisticated, but I think it goes back to what Daniel was saying about North Star, that even amongst different priorities, we have to have a North Star. And when we have a North Star, those varying elements that we're like negotiating can be kept in mind, but we're moving in one direction, right? So moving fast, for example, is a modality, whereas the North Star is like where we're going. And if we have to slow it down at times, we'll do so because we all understand we're moving in a certain direction. So I think, yeah, it's not always easy to figure out what the North Star is, but I think investing time and the energy to do so is probably the most important thing. Otherwise, it's very easy to pull in multiple directions using multiple modalities.
I would also just add, in terms of diagnosis, a lot of situations there's not a common diagnosis. So maybe the research assessment, maybe there's in every country in the world you see a lot of people debating a certain topic, and it goes on for a while until there's a shift in the general consensus of what the position is on that topic. And I think, at least in the region where I work, where we work here, is that people get tired really quick, and we've all, for two reasons, we're now used to and programmed to quick results and programs and timelines, and we need to finish because we have a donor report and we're done with this policy and with this project. We need to move to the next level. And people at the communal level, so that's everywhere from the neighborhood level to the municipal to the ministerial level. So there's different communities and organizations and stakeholders that work on all those different levels. Those communities have a bit of a breakdown. So they're not doing their work, they're not meeting enough, they're not advocating, they're not discussing. And a lot of data and information there is missing. So there's no common information or data to refer to.
Is there an example from your work where you observed that, and like whether there were two different stakeholders and they had these competing priorities, and it led to some sort of either breakdown in the system or a conflict?
Just a few. I've worked on the water sector in Lebanon for years. So an example of that is that you have the ministerial level, you have the political parties, you have the donor level, and then let's say the actors who are implementing projects. So the water establishment. So that's the entity that actually manages water under the ministry. So everyone has a different vision of what's the solution to water scarcity and increased supply of water to households. And after hundreds of millions of dollars, the question still hasn't been answered.
Well, there you go. This brings us to our next chapter, and I think Mazuba, this one that's close to your heart, and we've done a lot of this work with your team about designing a narrative, whether it's for internal or external communication, to really put meaning to the numbers and tell the stories of the things that are not necessarily told by numbers in the data. Mazuba, my first question here is, how has storytelling helped you and your team articulate impact beyond metrics?
Yeah, I think in various places I've worked and different projects I've worked on, I have found storytelling to be quite compelling in terms of, I think, long lasting, right? I think people relate to stories. Numbers are very compelling too in certain contexts, but if you compare you can pair numbers and stories, I think that's like a winning combination. And I think a lot of the time when you're driving work towards impact, you're on a journey, right? That's sort of a story in and of itself. I think similar to what Daniel said now, when there hasn't been consensus on what the problem is, what is the problem statement that we're dealing with? Often one is maybe assumed, and that then directs where the story goes. So I think I found it very valuable in making the work more accessible to people for whom this may not be their day-to-day work, trying to explain what one has been doing and why, with centering stories and centering people. yeah, I found that pretty effective.
I love this quote by Danella Meadows. She's a pioneer in systems thinking, and I've been referencing her work and will continue to throughout this conference. And she has a piece called Dancing with Systems, where she says that pay attention to what is important, not just what is quantifiable. And I think that beautifully captures the role of storytelling and narratives. Like you're putting the meaning behind it all. And as you said, you're centering the human, especially with um, social impact. A lot of it is not quantifiable. Like if you're talking about freedom of speech or inclusion or even human capability development, like these cannot be measured or showcased by numbers alone. And that's where stories and testimonials and narratives come in.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And for sure, it's not to say that numbers don't matter because we live in the world that we do, right? But I think finding multiple ways to make those numbers accessible to people is really important. Yeah, so I resonate with that for sure.
And I think narratives play a bigger role also in mobilizing people. So, like, if you're trying to get different partners, different stakeholders, different community members to be part of your vision and really work towards this system change, that's where narratives play a big role. Like, we all hear Vision 2030, for example. It is a branding moment, essentially, but it's even to us, it's very clear. Why that's happening. And if you look at the Saudi Vision 2030 very specifically, like everyone is marching to the same rhythm. The North Star, as we've been saying, is clear. And the narrative is just there.
100%. My first job, I think after studying, was for an experiential marketing company. And so I dabbled in a marketing world. I don't know if I would go back, but I've dabbled. And yeah, narratives are at the center, right? Like to mobilization, 100%. If you think about Obama's first campaign, Yes We Can, like we were mobilized around this idea. Um, I mean, I think Trump, people are mobilized around the story that he's been telling, for sure. Yeah, mobilization and storytelling and narratives very much go hand in hand.
That's very true. In more complex systems where different stakeholders play different roles, how do you make sure your impact story can still connect all of these layers? Whether it's the team on the ground, the decision makers at the top, or the external stakeholders, how can you make sure they're still connected, even though they might want to hear a different part of the story?
I mean, I think that's kind of the best story to hear, right? I'm thinking about a movie where you sort of watch the same scene from different perspectives, and then it gives you a fuller understanding of what you've just witnessed and how you understand that there's more than one way to witness something that's happened. And again, I think it goes back to the North Star, right? So if where we're going is agreed upon, understanding how that journey looks from different perspectives is critical. And I don't think it's confusing, right? It's you start a project, it impacts people in very many ways. And showing that impact just broadens the understanding of that impact. So I think this is an important thing for us to do more and more with multiple stakeholders. I think it's enriching.
Yeah, there's always different angles to the same story that you need to showcase, for sure. So another topic that I'd love for us to cover is about learning loops. So feedback loops and continuous learning are very central to systems thinking. And it's what keeps a system alive and adaptive. And we talked about that earlier from a strategy perspective. But now I want to explore this further, this idea of adaptability through learning loops. My first question, maybe for you, Dio, what does it take to design feedback loops that turn data and experience into action rather than just reporting?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, so I mean, before getting to like the tools and the steps and processes, you really have to have political will. So as an organization, you have to want that. And if your culture in your organization is to assume you know, so you have a lot of leaders or managers or teams that assume they know, there has to be a political will and consciousness that okay, no, we have to change something. That's really important. And if they already have that will, they have to instill an intentionality. So my intent, what are our intentions? Our intentions are very important, and that you could link that back to the first question we discussed about impact. You know, intentions are extremely important, and when you design a project or a theory of change, like you mentioned, you don't look at intentions, but you look at underlying assumptions. What are your assumptions based on the reality to go forward? So at a personal level and in terms of mobilizing intent, it starts with intentions. But then in terms of systems and tools, there's endless things that you can, put into your team meetings, after action reviews, learning exercises, feedback and complaint mechanisms, internal feedback loops, 360 assessments, a ton of things. But once you have that will and intention, it will come.
Has there been a moment from your work where you had all of this data, you had all of this feedback, you knew what needed to be done, but for some reason, or because of specific breakdown in the system, that it just became data and a report, but nothing was actually done to make that change?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it starts with having data, but not knowing what you need it for. So after having that political will and intentionality, what do we want to learn? And we don't have to really over-engineer it and have a strategy, a learning strategy or learning agenda, but you have to be clear. So let's say, like the water example I gave earlier, the water sector. So if I'm one of those actors, I'm one of those stakeholders, there are certain things that are very important for me that I need to learn about the context externally, about how I'm doing my job, if we're doing our job well or not, and internally in terms of our team, how we're operating and what needs to change. So I would have to decide as a team, what are the things that I need to learn about and continuously monitor. Um, and that's where there's a breakdown usually. People have too much data and they don't know what to do with it. Another reason could be just because they don't have the capacity or going back to the will. So they know what's wrong, but going back and fixing it or changing, course of action would be too costly. So let's just turn a blind eye right now because our original assumption of what we're doing is good enough. I mean, we still have good intentions. So people do fall back on good intentions in a bad way as well.
I think it's sometimes not just too much data, but also not the right data, or it's coming at the wrong time. Like, I think there's a time factor here. Like, as you say, to make the change in the right time, you need the data to come at the right time and be in the hands of the right people. And that's not necessarily just the decision makers, but actually, I think the more stakeholders that are aware of this information and surfacing it across the system, the more that everyone has a clearer view, a clearer picture of what's going on and what needs to change.
I would just add that I'm never surprised, and it's never been the case where I've been working with an organization or a person or an individual, and they didn't have data. They always have data, but it's hiding somewhere. They've forgotten about it. It's not mainstream into their process and they don't have a system around it. Or they just haven't cleaned it and they were lazy of really presenting it. Everyone has data, but you just forget about it.
I have a follow-up question here, and we've seen that a typical system trap as I mentioned earlier, is that introducing an intervention and then immediately changing it and thinking it has already failed without giving it enough time. But in the cases of your kind of work, where you're working on policy change or public sector work, actually things go much slower. And the change takes time. So how do you keep the momentum going in these kind of scenarios and take and have early indicators that there is progress happening?
So the technical answer is that you divide your objectives. You have overall outcomes, you have an overall goal, objectives, sub-objectives, activities, and you have your KPIs or indicators for each. And they're divided, of course, short, mid, and long term. And that's what businesses do, that's what ministries do, and that's what a lot of different sectors do, is that you have data that you're monitoring. What's usually missing there is that you don't have a overall theory of change or an idea of how this is supposed to work. So that when you have initial data, you then review your original theory or your assumption of how this is supposed to work. So in policy assessment, this is important as well. Because if a policy doesn't work, a lot of taxpayers' money has gone down the drain, but then also the problem hasn't been solved. So having the right data is good. And the same applies to impact evaluations or studies of a program. If you don't have the right data, you also can't make a good judgment if there was impact, or what went wrong, or what did go right. I'll stick with the technical answer and leave the rest to Mazuba.
Mazuba, do you have something to add here from your experience with policy work?
No, I think the technical answer is exactly the one that we're going to go with, because it's, that's how you're supposed to think about it, right? Short, medium, long, put things into categories. Obviously, in real life, it's messier than that. It doesn't always work like that, but yeah, that's the blueprint.
Yeah, I fully agree. We actually have a question here in the comments from Sabah. In your work with leaders, what practical exercises do you find effective in unpacking their underlying assumptions? I think this question was for you, Daniel.
Can you repeat it, please?
In your work with leaders, what practical exercises do you find effective in unpacking their underlying assumptions?
Oh, so in terms of techniques, be very curious and ask endless questions, but also stick with the why question. So ask about your overall objective. What's your strategy? Why are you doing this? And then keep on asking why until they look at the sky or the window with no answer. And give them enough space to reflect on that and hold the space and say, okay, but why did you invest? Why are you doing this activity? Why are you doing the program this way? Once they have that reflection, which they usually don't think about that level, they'll think about what they originally thought of. This is where the underlying assumptions come up, because they've buried those in their mind, and usually they're not documented in a document. So you have to reach the original logic. Yeah, you just have to be very patient, very curious, and ask a lot of questions.
You reminded me of the 5 whys framework, where you keep asking why 5 times until you get to the bottom of the thing. Thank you for that. I want to bring up something again here from the audience. Russia says the humanitarian and development field is essential, yet as both speakers noted, there is a persistent gap between beneficiaries and stakeholders. With donor support shrinking, what opportunities do you see for the sector to move beyond this dependency model?
Yes, I love this question. Thank you. NGOs should be NGOs. They shouldn't be contractors anymore. That's the first answer. So there's going to be a very difficult switch, which is, what is my model, my business model? My current business model is that I'm relying on external funds, so an aid system that gives me money. while I implement projects. So that's the contractor model. But NGOs all over the world, nonprofits, foundations, philanthropies, endowments, they've all have one business model, which is based on either long-term endowments or traditional fundraising, which NGOs in the region, and I'm speaking about the region here, have for some reason forgotten about in terms of their business model. And that's what it should go back to. So you have to reconnect with your people. And you see I see a lot of NGOs that don't have a functioning board. They don't have a general assembly. If they call for an event, they can't gather more than 100 people because they don't have a lot of people anymore. What does that mean? It means people that believe in the mission that they're doing, what they're doing. Once you have that, I mean, really, the whole region has a huge diaspora population, an expat population, and yes, CSR and working with the business world is not going to be the only answer because not a lot of them are investing in CSR. And traditional aid system is not going to work. So it's time for that hard breakup.
Yeah, I mean, we understand why this happened, right? Like people needed to fund their lives, and needed jobs, and so movements kind of, became like industrialized to a degree, and I understand that. But I think maybe similar to what Daniel's saying, there's so much value in crowdsourcing, and perhaps yes, moving towards a more membership-based way of thinking about things. And maybe these sectors have to rethink, right? Because I guess the humanitarian sector, the development sector broadly is failing, right? Like we're not resolving the problems that we started out wanting to resolve. And maybe that's the intention, right? That we kind of keep going because when you resolve a problem, then you're out of a job, which is not
Exactly.
like intention for anybody. But so yeah, maybe returning to our communities a little bit more to understand how to center those communities, even if the money doesn't come from those communities. I think centering those communities to understand what those problems are is critical, because funding was always going to shrink, even if it didn't happen as drastically as we're seeing it now. It's kind of a little bit inevitable. So, movement building, organization, stronger organizations are critical for anything to happen, really.
And sorry, thanks for saying that, Mazuba, about movement building. I think that's what the movement building muscle is now is non-existent in NGOs, right? So nonprofits, even the public sector, even what we call now social businesses. I mean, it's not there. But for hundreds and thousands of years, who has built hospitals and who has built schools and universities? It's been the nonprofit sector, really.
Yeah.
Do you know what the largest endowment in the world is? It's Harvard Business. It's Harvard University.
Yeah.
They're an endowment. It's a nonprofit. The second largest is Stanford University. They're nonprofits.
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to stay on this topic a bit, and maybe from a different perspective about engaging communities. In any complex systems, you have power dynamics, and I know Mazuba have a lot to say about this, that they can shape whose voices are heard. And so how do you ensure where you have to keep both parties engaged? How do you ensure that people closest to the problem, whether it's a local community or a regional team, are still able to influence decisions in ways that reshape the larger ecosystem?
Yes, I shouldn't have said I have a lot to say about this. I should have said that I'm emphatic about this. I don't think it's difficult. Like you center those at the margin, simply, right? That affected community should be at the center of decision making or planning. When we do this, then there's not no, but there's less risk of initiatives not taking into account local realities, right? And to center at all levels of an initiative, brainstorming, implementing, sourcing, resourcing, you have to make those who've been at the margins at the center.
Daniel, do you have anything to add here? Because I know your organization was created to also create those links between regional realities and global aid programs.
So I think, the message I always carry, and which is, it's the thing I enjoy most about my work, but it's also the most eye-opening, is when I talk to organizations, and then when I talk to fairly large organizations. We're talking about $1 million budgets a year or plus, not small nascent organizations. And I talk to them about the available of wealth in the world and where money is. Their faces are in complete shock, like they've never thought of it. So I think for me, it's the change in paradigm that we need. It's the change in mindset, and it's the change in sense of accountability. And I mean by accountability, the sense of ownership. We have to solve our own problems.
I know that's going to stay with me for a while. And I really love the fact that system thinking really centers forcing you to look at these different perspectives and engage these different people, because everyone owns and controls a different piece of the puzzle. And there's a lot of humility in that. And it really helps drive that collaboration and getting outside of your vantage point. You mentioned that earlier, Daniel. Both of you have worked across very different systems, like from the public to private sectors. And before we wrap up the discussion, I would love to hear from both of you. What can corporate leaders learn from how nonprofit and impact initiatives measure and sustain systemic change?
How to make a lot from a little, right? When you're a nonprofit, you got to be innovative and curious, and you just have to make a lot stretch when you have a little. And I think the private sector, if we think about big corporations, you just don't have that challenge in the same way, right? Resources are generally a little bit more accessible, which probably makes you a little bit less imaginative. Sometimes a little less curious, a little less inventive. Yeah.
I think that would make...
Sorry, go ahead, Hadeel.
No, I was just gonna say that would make for a great soundbite. How to make more from less. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, just to add on to that is the multi-dimension. So I think going back to the beginning of our discussion, what brought me to this career is that you think of the multi-dimensions of everything. So how the world works, how people change, why they make decisions. There's a lot that the nonprofit sector can learn from the business world in terms of behavior economics and consumer behavior, but vice versa as well. The larger part of the private sector doesn't know what behavior economics people know, and really, compartmentalize and put things into folders, the world into folders. And I think what we've learned to do is to see it as a whole and to understand our impact in it. but we still do get caught into the project cycle and our day-to-day, so forget about it. But we have that. And I think the message is to reconnect to what we all have as people in this sector. We have this skill.
And what shift in impact measurement or impact change do you think is most urgent for leaders today?
If it's one message, I mean, my message is clarity. The shift has to be clarity. I think that's been an underlying message. I think about our discussion in the last hour. It's clarity on your mission, clarity on who you're serving, clarity on what's your business model. Just being clear about it and not reactive.
Yeah, that resonates for me, and maybe something around like listening. Like I think one things that Daniel said, that we often have the information we need, but we often talk in circles, we often talk cross purposes, and we just kind of waiting to speak. And I think if we listen differently, or even if we learn to listen at all, like I feel like urgent to me, that we may have more solutions than we think. We're just not listening also to people in the room, or putting the right people in the room. But I think we need to listen in a different way.
I love both of these answers so much. So find your North Star and be truly curious and actively listen. This leads us to our final piece of the session. Before we let both of you go, we like to wrap up every webinar with a few rapid fire questions, which also make for great sound bites. And the protocol is as follows. I have 4 questions. I'll throw them at both of you, and I'll have both of you answer each question one by one. We can start by Daniel and Mazuba, just alphabetical order. Is that clear? Are you both ready?
Because we can't elaborate, right? You ask, we answer, we move.
Yes, quick, short, keep it snappy.
Competition.
So Daniel, the first question is, an effective system is?
Based on a clear mission.
One that works for all.
Beautiful. The one leadership quality most needed to nurture systems thinking is?
Intentionality.
Curiosity.
Love that. The ultimate mindset needed for effective system leadership is?
Humility.
Open-mindedness.
Wow. And finally, my favorite system thinking tool is?
Theory of change.
Theory of change. Same.
I agree with that one. Before we go, first of all, thank you, Mazuba and Daniel, so much for your time. We're really grateful that you made the time for this. And I personally learned a lot from you, and I'm sure our audience did too. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. And to all our attendees that tuned in, thank you. And if you missed anything or you want to rewatch this, we will be reposting the video on all of our social media channels, on YouTube, on our website as well. And for more on this topic of systems thinking, this conference will be on until November 3rd. And you can check out our full lineup of our online and in-person events on our website, www.cosmiccentaurs.com. And actually, Daniel will be joining us for an in-person event in Beirut next week. And to make sure you don't miss out on our future events, you can also subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media. Everything I just mentioned, the team is linking in the comment section below. And finally, our next webinar is actually tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. UAE time with Stoyan Yankov in conversation with our CEO and founder about designing systems to perform. we really hope to see you at the next one. And thank you again, everyone.
Thank you to you. Sorry. Thank you so much for holding the conversation so gracefully and so thoughtfully. Thank you to the whole Cosmic Centaurs crew. It's so hard to put these things on. There's so much preparation, so much deep thinking. Just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for these kind words, Mazuba. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hadeel. Thank you, Mazuba. It's great talking
Thank
with you.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.